I worked the breakfast and lunch shift at Millie's Diner on Route 56, about 12 miles outside of Dodge City, Kansas. This was 2003, maybe early 2004. Flat land in every direction. Sky so big it made you feel like something was pressing down on your chest. I'd been cooking there for about 3 years. Scrambled eggs, chicken fried steak, pie that came out of a Cisco box. Nothing fancy. I knew every truck driver who stopped in, knew what they took in their coffee, knew which booths creaked. The reason I'm telling you this is because of what happened in January of that year when I drove down to Wichita for a long weekend and came back with something I still can't fully explain. I'd flown out of Mid-Continent Airport. It was still called that back then, before they renamed it. I was visiting my cousin Rita, who'd just had a baby, and I planned to stay maybe 4 days. I checked one bag, a green duffel with a broken zipper I'd fixed with duct tape, some clothes, a toiletry kit. Standard stuff. When I landed back in Wichita on Sunday afternoon, my bag didn't come off the carousel. I stood there, watching the belt go around for 40 minutes. Other passengers drifted away. The belt stopped. My bag was gone. The lost baggage office was this beige room at the end of the terminal, past the last gate, with fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency that made my molars ache. A woman named Denise, I remember her name tag, typed some things into a computer, gave me a reference number printed on thermal paper, and told me the bag would likely turn up within 72 hours. If it did, they'd deliver it to my address. I drove back to the plains, forgot about the bag for a few days, the way you do. The duffel showed up on my porch on a Thursday, which was faster than I expected. Except, it wasn't my duffel. It was the same dark green, same general size, but the duct tape on the zipper was missing. The bag smelled different too, like industrial cleaner, and something underneath that, something I couldn't name right away. Animal, almost. Wet fur, maybe. I figured it was a mix-up, and I almost called the airport immediately, but I was running late for my shift, and I left the bag on my kitchen table. When I got home that night around 8, the bag had moved. Not far, maybe 2 feet, closer to the edge of the table. But I live alone, and I have no pets, and I knew where I'd left it. I stood in the doorway for a solid minute, just looking at it. Then I told myself I'd probably bumped the table on my way out and just didn't notice. I made myself believe that. I unzipped the bag. Inside, a set of mechanic's coveralls, size large, folded neatly. A rotary phone address book with most of the pages blank. A manila envelope sealed with a metal clasp. And underneath all of it, wrapped in a white hand towel, a cell phone, one of those old Nokia bricks, with the battery removed, and a piece of masking tape over the screen that said, in thin black marker, "Do not replace." I set the Nokia aside. I opened the manila envelope. Inside was a stack of printed emails, internal emails, from a company called Hargrove Meridian. I looked them up later, some kind of regional water rights consulting firm out of Salina, Kansas. The emails were between 2 people, someone named G. Altman and someone identified only as Dept Cord 7. The timestamps ran from October 2002 through December of the same year. Most of them were routine, budget allocations, fieldwork schedules. But about halfway through the stack, the tone changed. G. Altman wrote, "The Pratt County site is non-viable. Something is wrong with the substrate reading. The equipment keeps logging inputs that aren't possible. We need to close this before Q1. Deptequasa Cord." 7 replied, "Close it however you need to. The arrangement stands. You agreed to the terms." Altman, "I agreed before I understood what the terms meant. What happened to the survey team in October? That wasn't in the agreement." Cord, 7, "The well provides what it's asked to provide. You asked. It answered. This is not a negotiation." Then, 2 weeks later, one final email from Altman's address. Just 3 lines. "I found Reyes. What was left of him. I'm done. I'll take whatever comes." There was no reply to that one, I put the emails back in the envelope. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about that phrase. The well provides what it's asked to provide, and I couldn't figure out why it made my skin feel cold in a way that had nothing to do with the January draft coming under my back door. I did some looking the next morning before my shift. Hargrove Meridian had a website, barely functional, with a phone number that had been disconnected. G. Altman didn't come up in any search I ran, but I found a short item in the Pratt County Tribune archives, just a few paragraphs, about a water survey worker named Daniel Reyes, who had gone missing in October 2002 while working a site south of Iuka. His truck was found. He wasn't. Pratt County is about 60 miles from where I was sitting. I was going to call the airport again. I was going to turn the whole bag over to somebody, the sheriff's office, anybody. I'd made that decision. But before I could do anything, that night, I heard it. My property had an old hand-dug well in the backyard, dry for 20 years, covered with a sheet of plywood weighted down with a cinder block. I'd never thought much about it. At around 11 p.m., I was at the kitchen sink washing out a cast iron pan, and through the window above the sink, which was cracked open maybe an inch because the pilot light smell from the stove had been bothering me, I heard something, a voice, coming from the direction of the well. I want to be precise here because I know how this sounds. It wasn't loud. It was at conversational volume, the way someone would talk if they were standing about 10 feet away from you and there was no wind. It said my name, my full name, first and last. And then it said, in the same unhurried tone, "You opened it." I did not go outside. I want you to understand that clearly. I am not someone who walks toward a voice in the dark. I shut the window, turned off the kitchen light, and stood with my back against the interior wall with a 10-inch chef's knife in my hand for about 30 minutes, listening to nothing. In the morning, I drove to a payphone at the gas station on Route 56 and called the Wichita Airport Lost Baggage Office. The woman who answered, not Denise this time, looked up my reference number and told me my bag had already been claimed. 3 days ago, by the original owner. I said, "What was the name on the claim?" She paused. Then, G. Altman. "Sir, is something wrong?" I hung up. I went to the sheriff's substation in town. I brought the manila envelope. The deputy who took my statement was polite, wrote everything down, told me they'd look into it. I never heard back. A few weeks later, I drove past the substation, and it looked like the office had been reassigned. Different nameplate on the door, someone else entirely. The bag I returned to my porch. I don't know how else to put this. I didn't want it inside anymore. I left it by the well, because that felt like the right direction to put it. It was gone by morning. So that's the part I can tell you. Here's the part I've thought about almost every day since. The Nokia, with the battery removed and the tape on the screen. I never replaced the battery. I left it in the bag. But before I did, I peeled back one corner of the masking tape, just one corner, and looked at the screen. There were 2 missed calls logged. No number, just a name in the caller ID field. Mine. I've cooked breakfast at Millie's 6 days a week since then, and I check the well cover every single morning before I leave. And some nights when the wind comes in from the south across those flat fields and gets down to that particular low moan, I still don't open the kitchen window. My name is Ray Decker. I drove a cab out of Pensacola for 11 years, starting in 1971. Mostly airport runs, mostly drunk tourists heading down to the beaches, mostly forgettable. But there is one fare I have never been able to put down, and I have tried. Lord knows I have tried. It was August of 1974, the kind of August that sits on your chest, humidity so thick, you feel like you're breathing through a wet dish towel. I was working the late shift, which for me meant picking up from Pensacola Regional around 9 at night and running fares east along Highway 98 until the calls dried up, usually around 2 or 3 in the morning. The Panhandle in summer was its own animal. The air smelled like salt and diesel and something else I never had a word for, something faintly organic, like low tide mixed with whatever the pine forests were sweating out. I got a dispatch call at 11:40 p.m. for a pickup at the Gulf Breeze Motor Hotel. Small place, 12 rooms, a half-lit vacancy sign that flickered whenever a truck went past on the highway. I'd been there maybe a dozen times, nothing special. The night manager was a heavy-set man named Gerald, who wore the same short-sleeve button-down every time I saw him, and kept a portable radio behind the desk, playing country stations so low you could only hear it if the lobby was completely quiet. I pulled into the lot and waited. That was normal. Sometimes fares ran late getting their bags together. What was not normal was that after 7 minutes, nobody came out. I gave 2 short honks, which was my way of saying, I'm here, and I'm patient, but I'm not free. Still nothing. I almost pulled out. I almost did. Instead, I went inside. Gerald was behind the desk, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at a point somewhere above the check-in ledger, the way a man looks when he's just heard something he hasn't finished processing yet. The radio was off. That was the first thing that struck me wrong. Gerald always had that radio going. "Fare for a cab?" I said. He looked at me then. Not startled exactly. More like he was relieved to have something real to look at. "Room 7, he said. "Guest called down about 10 minutes ago. Said they'd be right out." I waited another 5 minutes in the lobby. The fluorescent tube over the desk was doing that thing where it cycles through its death. A slow, rhythmic dimming, almost like breathing. I looked at the check-in ledger on the counter. Gerald hadn't closed it, and I'm not proud that I looked, but I looked. The last entry for room 7 was a name I didn't recognize, Walter H. Cobb. Check-in date, August 14th. That was 3 days prior. And in the checkout column, written in different ink, darker, like someone had pressed harder, August 14th. Same day. Checked out the same day he checked in. I pointed at it. "This right." Gerald looked at it like he'd never seen it before. Then he closed the ledger and said, "I'll go knock on 7. He came back in under a minute. His face had a quality to it I didn't understand until later. Not fear, exactly. More like the expression of a man who'd knocked on a door and gotten an answer he couldn't account for. "They're ready," he said. "They'll be right out." I want you to understand the next part carefully, because this is the part that I've gone over more times than I can count. A man came out of room 7, medium height, wearing a short-sleeve collared shirt and dark trousers, which struck me as strange because it was 91 degrees at midnight, and even the tourists had given up on looking presentable by that hour. He was carrying a single paper bag, the brown grocery kind, folded down at the top. No suitcase, no travel bag. Just that one paper bag held against his chest with both arms, the way you'd hold something you didn't want to drop. He got in the back seat. I asked him where he was headed. He said, "Wherever you think is far enough." Now, in 11 years of driving a cab, I had heard some strange things said in that back seat. People in cabs say things they won't say anywhere else. So I didn't panic. I said, "I need an address, friend." He gave me one. A street over in Navarre, residential, normal enough. So I drove. He didn't speak again for the first 10 minutes. I watched him in the rear view when I could. He was looking out the window, but not the way people look out windows on long drives. He was watching the tree line, specifically watching it, the way you watch something you're trying to keep track of. Then he said, "They're going to tell you I was never there." I said, "Beg your pardon?" "At the motel," he said. "They're going to say I was never there, that there's no record. And when they do, I need you to remember that you picked me up, that you saw me, that I got in this car and I was warm and I was here." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "All right." He was quiet again. We passed a stretch of highway with no lights on either side, just the long, flat dark of the panhandle between Pensacola and Navarre, the kind of dark that doesn't have anything behind it. My headlights were pulling shapes out of the fog that was coming off the bay, low-lying wisps that crossed the road and disappeared. The man in the back seat had stopped watching the trees. He was watching the road ahead. His hands, still wrapped around that paper bag, had gone white at the knuckles. I said, "You want to tell me what's in the bag?" He said, "Nothing that belongs to me anymore." We reached the address, a small house, dark, no lights on inside or outside. He didn't move to get out right away. He sat there for a moment, looking at the house, and in that stretch of time, I felt the kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature, the kind that doesn't have a source. My hands on the wheel were fine. The air coming in from the vent was warm, but the back of my neck went cold and stayed cold. He set the paper bag on the seat beside him, very carefully, like he was setting down something sleeping. Then he got out. He leaned back into the open door and looked at me directly for the first time. And I want to be precise about this. His eyes were not wrong. He didn't look like a ghost, didn't look like a dead man. He looked like a man who had been through something he couldn't explain and had decided to stop trying. "You saw me," he said. "I saw you," I said. He nodded and closed the door. I watched him walk to the house. He used a key. The door opened, and he went inside, and the door closed behind him, and the light inside never turned on. I looked at the back seat. The paper bag was still there. I left it. I don't know why, but I left it. I drove back to Pensacola, and I didn't touch it. When I pulled into the lot at the end of my shift, I stood outside the cab for a long time before I reached in and picked it up. It was light, almost too light. I unfolded the top and looked inside. It was a motel key, a small orange plastic fob, the number 7 stamped into it in black, and beneath it a single photograph, black and white, creased down the middle. A man I didn't recognize standing in front of a building I didn't recognize, smiling at the camera. On the back, in handwriting that was not the same as the ledger entry, were the words, August 14th, 1974. Return this if I don't. I called the Gulf Breeze Motor Hotel the next morning. A different voice answered. Younger, unfamiliar. I asked about a guest in room 7. Gave the name from the ledger. Walter H. Cobb. There was a pause. Then the voice said, "Sir, that room has been empty all week. We don't have any record of a guest by that name." I went down there in person. Gerald was not working. A young woman at the desk opened the ledger, flipped to that week's entries, and showed me the page. The entry for room 7 was gone. Not crossed out. Gone. The page was clean. The ink on either side of where it should have been was undisturbed, as if no one had ever written anything there at all. I kept the photograph. I kept the key. I never went back to that motel again. The Gulf Breeze Motor Hotel closed in 1981. Electrical fire in the early morning hours. No guests, no injuries. They said the building had been empty for the night. In 2003, a local history writer reached out to me. She was doing a piece on unsolved disappearances in Escambia and Santa Rosa counties, and Walter H. Cobb's name had come up in county records as a man who had been reported missing in August of 1974, reported missing on the 14th. His car had been found in the Gulf Breeze Motor Hotel parking lot. No other trace. The writer had found 4 other people who had interacted with Cobb in the days before his disappearance. She interviewed them all. By the time she got to me, she was rattled. Every single one of the 4 people she'd spoken to before me had given her an interview, and then, within 48 hours, called her back and retracted it. Same reason every time. Same wording. She read it to me from her notes. I don't think I should have spoken about this. I'm not able to confirm what I told you. word for word. All 4 of them. I told her everything anyway. I still have the photograph. The man in it is smiling, and I have looked at that smile for 30 years, trying to decide if it is the smile of a man who knows what's coming or a man who doesn't. I still haven't decided. The key still opens something. I don't know what. I've never tried.